A federal judge in Washington on Wednesday ruled that the Trump administration violated federal law by barring migrants from qualifying for asylum in the U.S. based on their fears from domestic abuse or gang violence in their home countries, the second judicial rebuke to the administration's efforts to limit asylum in as many months. Then Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced new rules in June that required U.S. officials to deny those applications for asylum and place the applicants into expedited deportation proceedings. Attorneys filed a lawsuit on behalf of a dozen foreigners facing deportation as a result of those rules, arguing that the new guidelines represent an evisceration of asylum protections for the most vulnerable immigrants fleeing horrific persecution. On Wednesday, U.S. District Judge Emmett Sullivan agreed, issuing a permanent injunction against the Departments of Homeland Security and Justice, forcing them to abide by the old rules. The judge ruled that restricting asylum to those victims was a clear violation of the immigration laws and ordered the administration to reverse course. Many of these policies are inconsistent with the intent of Congress as articulated in the Immigration and Nationality Act, Sullivan wrote. And because it is the will of Congress, not the whims of the executive, that determines the standard for expedited removal, the court finds that those policies are unlawful. The judge also ordered the administration to return any foreigners to the U.S. who had been denied asylum under the new rules and deported to their home countries so they can receive new asylum hearings. Sullivan set out a rigid schedule for the government to inform the court of people who may have been deported under the new guidelines, and to issue regular status reports on its progress. The permanent injunction will remain in place pending possible appeals from the Department of Justice. Spokesman Steve Stafford said Wednesday that Sessions' decision to limit asylum was in accordance with U.S. law and vowed to fight the ruling. "We are reviewing our options with regard to this ruling, and we will continue to restore the rule of law in our immigration system," Stafford said. Attorneys who filed the lawsuit from the ACLU and the Center for Gender Refugee Studies at the University of California, Hastings College of the Law, hailed the ruling as a first step on the road toward defending the unequivocal right of migrants to seek refuge in the U.S. "This ruling is a defeat for the Trump administration's all-out assault on the rights of asylum seekers," said Jennifer Chang Newell of the ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project, who argued the case before Sullivan. "The government's attempt to obliterate asylum protections is unlawful and inconsistent with our country's long-standing commitment to provide protection to immigrants fleeing for their lives." Sullivan's ruling follows a separate decision from a federal judge in San Francisco on November 19, which temporarily prevents the Trump administration from implementing new rules that bar migrants who enter the U.S. illegally from requesting asylum. In that case, U.S. District Judge John Tigar ruled that Trump may not rewrite the immigration laws, and issued a temporary restraining order that will last at least until a December 19 court hearing. The Supreme Court is expected to rule this week whether it will hear that case. The two rulings combined could have an immediate impact on the thousands of migrants who are gathering in Tijuana and other Mexican border cities, many of whom are planning to request asylum in the U.S. Sullivan's ruling focuses on the very definition of asylum, which is granted to people who fear persecution in their home countries based on their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or their political opinion. Since the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1980, which created the current asylum rules, U.S. officials have allowed some victims of domestic abuse and gang violence to remain in the U.S. When announcing the new policy in June, Sessions disputed that practice, arguing that the definition of persecution involves actions committed by a government. Extending asylum protections beyond that, he said, turns the U.S. asylum system into a general hardship statute. Victims of personal crimes do not fit this definition no matter how vile and reprehensible the crime perpetrated against them, Sessions said. The ACLU argued in court papers that such a ban ignores the fact that most victims of domestic abuse are women. U.S. courts have ruled that such gender-based persecution fits into the definition of asylum because they are part of a social group. And while victims of gang abuse include men and women, the lawsuit argues that a person can be equally persecuted by a government or a private actor. Broadly denying both groups of people, the lawsuit argued, represents not only a violation of immigration law, but an abdication of the U.S. government's responsibility to care for the helpless. The Trump administration is violating U.S. immigration law, international refugee law, and our Constitution, said Eunice Lee, co-legal director of the Center for Gender Refugee Studies, which filed the lawsuit along with the ACLU. It's putting the lives of our plaintiffs and thousands of asylum seekers in grave danger. Sullivan made headlines in August when he became enraged over the administration's decision to deport a Salvadoran mother and daughter who were part of the lawsuit. During a court hearing, he ordered the government to turn that plane around, which led the Department of Homeland Security to immediately return the mother and daughter to the U.S. Sullivan is also overseeing the case of Michael Flynn, a retired three-star general and President Donald Trump's former national security advisor who was chastised by the judge Tuesday during a sentencing hearing.